What's going on, my people? Happy Sunday. Welcome to Software Sundays. I'm your host, KD. And in this series, we discuss the latest news in the tech industry, as well as answering a few questions from our community about how we can become better developers and professionals. So, with that being said, welcome. Thank you for being here, and let's get started. So, for the first discussion today, I wanted to mention the Waymo issue out in San Francisco where they had power outages and the traffic light went down, but then the Waymo vehicles stopped functioning, which caused a ton of traffic in the area. I'm thinking of how we could make those types of systems more reliable in a factory. Let me step back. When we're thinking about autonomous vehicles, there are some infrastructure level requirements that those vehicles have to make sure that they can function wherever they're being deployed to. Inside of a factory where most autonomous vehicles are deployed, or even on some private towing yards, or yards as well as like shipping yards, where you have complete control over the environment, the number of people who are there, the energy inside of that environment, the routes, everything. You are in full control of all of those variables. Now, when we deploy those same vehicles into the cities, now if they're relying on the infrastructure that exists in the city to always be uniform, that's going to be a challenge. Some cities have different issues in their roads where you might have larger or smaller bumps. So that might register as a crash or a bump, something that we need to pause with. Or you might have a city with unreliable energy grids. San Francisco or some areas in the Bay might not be conditionally unreliable, but there are some times where the power goes out. It happens out here in Newark also. And I'm not sure how widespread that can become, but even one vehicle being stopped on a single lane block during a power outage is going to cause significant delays near and around that area. So when we're thinking about deploying autonomous vehicles and working on the teams that work with them, the most important thing to think about is how to design for failure. And that's probably useful in any scenario or any application or industry you're working with. You need to understand how your system will work when all the things that you think will work aren't going to. And that will happen a lot. Sometimes the network will go down. Sometimes the power may not be reliable. And you have to be able to still function and serve your function regardless. So that's one of the things to keep in mind. I'm sure Waymo is still figuring out what the exact solution would be. Um, I'm thinking that they're relying on the lights either from a visual standpoint where there is some type of computer vision model running inside of the vehicles that is able to see whatever the current status of that light is, and they can tell whether they should go, slow down, whatever. If they don't get that input, maybe those vehicles are choosing to just stop because it doesn't know and it doesn't know how to make a decision without knowing. Um, Another thing that could potentially solve it is to sync the lights with the vehicles themselves, where those lights run on a schedule, right? We could schedule it at a time, and we could schedule it based off of some, epoch that we want to agree to. If the city and the vehicle manufacturers came to an agreement on what that would be, or even just agreed on at this time of day, the lights will be this, then that would be one way. That doesn't solve the issue of other vehicles being on the road that don't have that same schedule. So that would still become a problem that you have to think about. Um, so that's one, but that's something to think about. Maybe in smaller areas, or maybe inside of that factory that I mentioned. Maybe if the main grid that you're using for handling lights or train railroads, if whatever that main thing is that's scheduled on a time or basis, maybe share that time, distribute that information to all of the vehicles on that infrastructure, on that network, so that they can all schedule with each other. That does increase the amount of memory that you need to store and be available on those vehicles, but the trade offs, right? How often is the power grid going to go down? Maybe that is the primary thing to look at uh, from a uh, design perspective. Maybe we upgrade the lights so that they always run on a backup, and that backup gives them the same access to the timer. Maybe they have the timer. So there's a lot of ways to solve those problems, but it would definitely require some type of public-private partnership to make sure that both sides are thinking about it clearly, and it's not going to work consistently across cities. You may have different cities that are on running on different systems. You may have different areas of the city that had more modern technology versus other areas of that city. So that makes it more difficult to deploy on a full basis. And we could just make the vehicles smarter, right? Where the same way a human would kind of decide and feel confidently enough to decide I should go now and work with other humans that are also not sure. But I'm not sure how safe that would be, at least to start. But something to keep in mind. I'm definitely happy to work with a team like Waymo's. There are a lot of problems that I'm seeing, and that's actually why I'm building ToePro to help solve some of the maintenance issues that these guys and others uh, are going to be facing moving forward. Next, I wanted to discuss a challenge that professors are having inside of colleges where they're choosing to have students provide oral exams versus written exams in order to really test and make sure that their students are understanding the knowledge that they're teaching. This kind of shifts it from allowing the student to have time to process the information that they're learning about and create a cohesive document, because it seems like the students may not be doing that anyway. They're choosing to use ChatGPT and other solutions to build and write for them. So the actual thought process doesn't even occur to them. When you require an oral exam, you require them to at least read whatever the chat or AI is providing. And that reading is one form of learning. And then when you're also speaking what you're reading, so if you have to recite it, maybe you're practicing for your oral exam, or even just delivering the oral exam. Or even if the first time you read it is during the actual presentation, at least you read it at some point. Right now, I guess there's no guarantee that the students are reading it, and they're just giving something up during the due date. So that's not helping their learning and educational journey. I think it's a challenge that more than just professors are probably facing, because at every level students are finding that they have a tool that can do so much of the work that they maybe struggled with in the past. They're finding it to be so much easier with these tools. But at the same time, we haven't identified ways as a team to make sure that we're putting out more challenging problems and also making those problems more equitable because there are some students that don't have those same resources. They may be not using ChatGPT. How do we make sure we're providing education on a level playing field and teaching the students how to use the tools that they have while also challenging them in a way that keeps them interested and engaged to work on these problems that we're discussing and building for? Another thing that I came across was that China is currently they got an EUV machine operational, and not EUV full, well, not an EUV with full chip uh, etching capabilities, but they were able to create a machine that can emit the light that will be used to eventually etch into more advanced semiconductors. A little backstory. Right now, there is one. If you're familiar with the AI infrastructure, I would say layers. We have the Googles and the uh, let's say cloud providers that are providing the hardware that the Anthropics or the Open AIs and all these other teams are using to actually train and run their models. These are the cloud providers, data center providers. Those providers are purchasing chips from NVIDIA for the most part, or they are slowly shifting their supply chains to be more vertically integrated. But those cloud providers are purchasing from NVIDIA's and even Intel's or Samsung's. And those chip designs are being manufactured, meaning they are being actually built, crafted. The physical component is being crafted by Intel does a little bit, uh, Samsung does a bit, Qualcomm does a bit of it as well. But one of the major, and I say one of the major manufacturing provider for the most advanced chips are TSMC. But TSMC is using the EUV machines from ASML. And these machines cost billions of dollars each to produce, and they're only exported to a few different partners, like I mentioned, TSMC, Samsung, Intel, because of some export controls that the US and in the case of ASML, the Dutch government have placed on top of China. So China, long story short, cannot have access to the most advanced technology that they would be able to need to create the most advanced technology at scale, right? It's like a chicken and egg type problem for them. But this possible, I don't know how real it is, right? Uh, this possible exploration into building their own EUV machines and having some success in generating the light at least, I'm not sure how long it would take for them to actually build the machine that they would need to design and build the chips, and especially at scale. I think once they figure out how to do it, China has a much easier time of doing things at scale just due to their manufacturing network and infrastructure as a whole. So they might have a advantage there, but they don't even know how to build the machine in the first place. So they still rely on the Western governments to provide the machines for them, and they're only providing the older machines for chips for automotives or for less advanced uh, devices. If China is able to get access and build their own chips, that whole issue with them not being able to get access to the Blackwell chips last year, and having to get those hoppers, or what I think the Hopper 200s were the ones that they were able to get. But all of that nonsense they wouldn't even care about because they would be able to do it themselves. They would have again, going back to fully vertically integrated within their country, have all of that capability in house. So they wouldn't have to deal with any suppliers that are coming from the US and that could potentially sanction them for anything that they're doing. They're looking to operate 100% without the US inside of their supply chains, and they're potentially very close to doing that. So it's something I'm going to keep an eye on. I know a lot of the value inside of the AI supply chain is, for me, difficult to measure, and it's hard to know who's getting the most value where. But the monopoly that ASML has for the machines, these EUV machines, is not something that will be easily released, even if China were to begin manufacturing their own. That would take China in their own direction, but the rest of the West, I think, would still be relying on ASML to provide those capabilities. Um, but we'll see moving forward what actually comes from there. But it's definitely very interesting. And we have a few questions for this week. Uh, Thank you to our community for providing, some questions, pretty much. And if you have a question on how to improve as a software engineer, how to improve and go to market as a founder of a software startup, or just want to discuss the technology industry and technology space, please reach out. Let me know your questions and let's uh, share ideas and let's build together.
What are 5 key data governance principles?
So, data governance is based off of having a clear standard for data quality, clear ownership of who is in charge and accountable and responsible for that data, a reliable way to store and maintain that data, and security and audit controls in place to know when it was accessed, who accessed it, and why, as well as managing the entire life cycle of that data from wherever it's created to how and where it's transferred to, and to finally toward wherever it's being stored and used for whatever further analysis that may be required on that data. Uh, you have to have a policy in place in your organization for each stage and each aspect that I just mentioned, because the saying about garbage in, garbage out, that matters a lot when you're trying to build insights and get insights from the data that you're collecting. As a team, if the data is being duplicated, or if the data from one version or one instance of the application is being somehow affected or somehow broken or dirtied, where it's no longer going to be useful in that final analysis, if you don't have a way to track where that issue is coming from with some data quality and data governance standards, you're going to keep having less than efficient models for your data and for your business. If you don't have an owner for that data, and you don't have the security policies in place to secure that data because you hadn't gone through the practice of identifying what type of data you are actually storing. Are you storing PII data? Are you storing PCI data? Is the data under a health uh, GDPR? Well, that's probably more privacy, but under a health specific uh, legal regulation. You have to know that before you even start capturing the data. You have to know that when you're deciding to move that data from one region to another for analysis. Having an owner in place to answer any questions about where the data is coming from or why it's being stored is going to make sure you can answer the tough questions you'll get from your clients as well as regulators. But it also makes it easier for you and your team in the future to find and create new opportunities for your business because having that quality in place and that governance in place, you can say, hey, we're storing this type of data right now for the services we're providing, but we're looking to offer another service, and maybe we need to store that data again here or make it available here. Knowing what types of systems you can put in front to make it available. Do you expose it via a just file upload like with S3, or do you make it available from an API endpoint? Who's going to be accessing it? What types of permissions do they need to access this data? Having an owner makes it incredibly easy to do those next steps that you may need to do. And it allows you to think about the other non-functional requirements that may be in place. Encryption. How does it need to be encrypted? What region it can be stored in. Like I mentioned that there are some countries that require you to keep data physically inside of a specific region, or you can't store it anymore, or you can store it, but you can't process it in a different location. And there's a lot of different rules in place, but if you don't have those documented, you're facing heavy fines, and that's gonna be a lot eventually.
What is open source software?
So open source software is software that is publicly viewable and usable by anyone. It differs a bit from just publicly available software that you can see but you don't really have permission to use. Uh, but open source allows developers all over the world to collaborate on the same projects uh, and actually improve them to make them better for everyone who's using it. If you ever seen those memes where it's like the whole internet standing on a little piece of code or a little block that is supposed to represent some repository or some project that's being maintained by three people across the Americas and the Latin regions. Uh, there are projects that are just maintained by anyone just because of the support that those projects and that technology is getting from the community and the rest of the world. Sometimes open source software is used inside of enterprises. It can be the backbone, and it usually is the backbone of the applications that we're running or even the databases that we're running. MongoDB does have an open source uh, repository, and the you can run it on your own. There are licenses in place for how you can use and how you can make changes to the code and what your responsibilities are legally with that revised code. But you can use it if you want to use it. and they have a company that has been built around that open source project to provide support, to lead a lot of the innovation for the technology. Uh, when you have open source software, the benefit to an enterprise is that they can have some type of functionality without investing deeply into that project yourself. You want to spend more resources, more time, more energy on your actual business problems, not trying to figure out how to scale a Docker or containerization technology or tool. You want to leave that to the open source community and pull in what you need to pull in. But that also prevent presents a type of risk for that enterprise because a lot of the packages we're using inside of our production software is being maintained by people we don't even know, and they are using dependencies from people we also don't know and may not even be aware of that they exist. That type of software supply chain becomes much easier to audit and secure when you can say, okay, this is the code, these are the packages that they use, and basically follow that trail as deeply as you want to follow it. Uh, Having that visibility in place just makes it easier for you and your team for the future. And the visibility and that community support that I mentioned is even more important because over time, when different researchers or developers find issues inside of the code, they're going to make it known. They're going to alert the community to do something about this vulnerability or that the vulnerability exists, and they're going to actually make the change themselves. Or you can decide that, hey, I'm not gonna use this type of project anymore because I'm not comfortable with some of the configurations that they have inside of their technology. And if I use it and bring it into my system, it makes my system less secure than it needs to be. So you might have different regulatory requirements than the people who are maintaining that software. So you have to keep that in mind. And one of the big things about open source software is the fact that there are licenses that are going to change again how you can use it, when you can use it, and where. And from a business standpoint, you may want to rely on more proprietary technologies, but usually your team is going to have more experience with a more open source version of that tool because they could have used it without any licenses. When you're using proprietary technology, usually only the people that could afford to use that technology are using that technology. And so unless their community is sufficiently large, you won't have the access to the talent you'll need to build and innovate with that tool. You may end up needing to go to something totally different later anyway.
Why shouldn't developers have access to production?
So I thought about this a few days ago when I was working on my project, and I realized I was making a few changes to production, or production in my case is really just my beta environment. And some of those changes were directly affecting the database. And I realized that when I made that change, or when I made the change to an application code for something that I was using, that me making that change here without actually pushing it through the right pipelines that it needs to be pushed through to get the checks that it needs and to have that history that it needs to have, or that the team needs to have to know even what's really out there. What are we running in production? When you have a developer having the ability to make changes and the know-how, and I say ability as in the know-how, the skill to do it, as well as the access, then they're more likely to use that. They're going to troubleshoot and solve something in production. But if they make that change in production without making that change inside of your code base, you're going to have inconsistent behavior across your environments. And that's one of the most difficult problems to solve for, because you're going to say it worked in all of these tests in this environment, but if they're not running the same application or the same versions of different tools and technologies, you don't have a way to know how it will work inside of production. So that's something to keep in mind. Just, you know, you want to always have a principle of least privilege inside of your organization, whether it's for a database or an environment or an application. You want to make sure that only the people who need to have access to this have access to it. A lot of the times when you have a smaller team, that's more difficult to do because you really might need your developer to go troubleshoot something in production. When that's the case, have really defined and hard processes in place. So maybe we have a way to roll back in production very easily for that developer to use, but we don't make changes directly to database configurations. We just roll back. Rolling back versus uh, completely making a new change is different, because it allows us to, one, get our platform or system back to a usable state for our customers, and it gives us the ingredients we need to actually go test what the problem was that was experienced previously, because we still have access to that environment or that version of the code. We just not using it right now. So make sure to have that inside of your team. Uh, and if you can, separate the duties of your developers, where the person who is responsible for building the application is not the same person who is responsible for operating that application in production. I know DevOps as a practice has made it where you're supposed to own everything wherever it is. And yes, there should be some type of ownership, especially for teams where they are able and large enough that someone can be on call, and you share that responsibility, but you don't want to have one person or one team in place just to do everything, because their focus is not going to be well used in every one of those areas.
How to navigate large software projects.
So if you're going and jumping into a large project, you're going to first need to understand what you're looking at. So ideally, you're jumping in, there's a README in place. Figure out what the core functionality is of this application or this team or this system that you're going to be supporting. Next, figure out how to operate it. Again, we're not doing this in production. You're going to I run this inside of a local environment if that's possible, or figure out how to use it inside of test. And you can see what production looks like, but you should not be doing much in production. Maybe you're looking at a demo or a video of what happens in production, but you don't do it yourself. But you need to understand what it is that is happening when this code runs, when this function executes. And then once you see what that high level vision is, then try to drill down deeper into the core of how it's doing it. Is it using a particular database? Is it using this infrastructure? Like, does it run on a SaaS platform where you don't have access to the infrastructure, or is it running on some on-prem data center where you are able to update the networks, spin up new VMs directly for it, and whatever else may be uh, specific to your organization? Or is it running in the cloud where you have some combination of the two? You have to understand that infrastructure. Then you want to find whatever documentation you can find of the most recent things that have been a priority inside of your team, whether it's these are the bug fixes that have been worked on recently. And so we're looking at accessibility as a major concern, or and you can look at the tickets that are open and the ones that have been recently closed because you want to see what are the priorities. Uh, when you understand the priority, you can focus on those areas or those modules to start and then kind of move on from there as you come across it. Whenever you're making early changes, focus on small impact changes that you can get reviewed quickly and approved because you want to build that muscle of deploying and testing for that new team. You want to get into the habit that that team is already using so that when you do have to make a much larger change, it's not 100% new to you. And yes, you may be familiar with Git, but you may not be familiar with the branching strategy that that team is using. That's what you need to focus on. So you might just update a comment. You might, when you're going through your KT sessions, add some documentation into the repo so that one, you can have that new documentation that was needed, as well as two, get other people across the team to review that documentation you're adding, and they can either clarify or confirm whatever it is that you are saying is happening. And that makes the team even better for the next person to join, as well as making sure that any assumptions have been resolved as early as possible. But you want to have and understand whatever guardrails are in place for that application because those guardrails are going to make sure you are working in the way that the team needs you to work on. And this is definitely assuming that this is like a large project. It has been maintained by over a dozen developers across a number of years. And at this point, we're just main we're really just focusing on maintenance, not so much new innovation. If you're building something new, you have a lot more flexibility on what you can add, what direction you want to go into, and that is going to be a much different experience when you're jumping into those because there really won't be as much for you to learn up on, but that added possibility makes it more likely for you to not know exactly where you want to go. It'll be too many options for you.
What is the transport layer security protocol?
So transport layer security protocol, or it's also known as TLS, is a method for authenticating, encrypting, and ensuring data integrity of digital messages. When we think about every service today that we use on the internet, you are at a level just passing data from yourself to some other system uh, or company, whether it's uh, starting a bank transfer from your bank to your favorite coffee shop, or it's you requesting a web page from your browser. whatever you're doing is just sending data and getting some data back. Before TLS, all of that data that you were sending, whether it was a password or a birth date, social security number, whatever it may be, even your favorite latte drink, that information, that message was being sent publicly. So anyone listening would be able to hear you. So it's like having a conversation in a crowded room and you're thinking people don't hear you. They can hear you. So if that was the case, when that was the case, a lot of these services we rely on today would be impossible to actually operate. But with TLS, we are now able to encrypt those messages and make sure that we can do things securely inside of noisy environments, no matter who is on the line listening. Again, going back to networking and how that works, if you don't know, every message you send over the internet is going across the public telephone wires. Those telephone wires are owned and can be owned by different people, and they can have different, you know, things that they do with that data. But when you're using TLS, that data is encrypted from where you send it to where it needs to go, because and it requires other infrastructure in place. You have to have a certificate and you have to have a trusted certificate authority. Those could be government entities, but it could also be just large trusted institutions that are capable of providing those secrets, those certificates at scale, and who everyone feels comfortable syncing up with. There's a lot of things in place to make TLS work, but it's the difference between what we can do and what we could not do without it. It's just another cryptographic protocol. Um, it uses different cryptographic techniques, though. There is some standard encryption with, I think it uses AES 256. It could have used the SHA uh, secure hash algorithm in the past, but basically it requires some hashing to make sure that the data has not been changed. So if the way a hash works is if you tamper, flip a one to a zero. If you change a capital S to a lowercase s, both of those changes would change the signature of that message, and the client or server would be able to tell that that number changed. So if you were trying to get between a bank transaction and change the account number from your account number to another person's account number, you cannot. Well, you can do that, but if you were to do it, we would be able to tell that it was done, and we could just say we're not accepting that message at all. So it makes mail delivery at scale and more secure possible. So that's pretty much all we had for the questions for today. Again, thank you for joining. Uh, Definitely send your questions, and if I didn't clarify something as well as I should have, leave a comment below. Like, follow, subscribe, all that stuff. Um, and my final message for today is to really lean into whatever your responsibilities are. If you are responsible for keeping your space clean, if you are responsible for doing some service at work, get more comfortable taking that responsibility on. A lot of people shy away from responsibilities because, frankly, it is a lot of work. But when you feel comfortable and confident enough to take on more responsibility, you actually become more able to challenge yourself. And when you challenge yourself, and whether you succeed or fail, you become more capable over time. taking on responsibility will give you more capableness inside of your life. And that's really all you need to be successful. You have to gather and develop the skills that you have, but you're never going to be able to do that if you're not trying to take the projects that will be difficult to do. Um, you don't want to just trust and leave it to someone else to do the work that you know needs to get done. If you think it's valuable, you have to be the one that pushes it and drives it to become and actually be the reality. It's your goal, it's your responsibility. That's pretty much all. I had a whole, I'll say, a debate with my wife last week about this, and we were talking about who is responsible for different accidents. And I could say that an argument can be made that everyone is responsible for everything that happens inside of the universe because everyone has a chance to do something. They could have done something different. When people talk about that butterfly effect, if a butterfly flaps its wings in China, that could cause a tsunami in London. And as we were talking about time with that, but that's in real life space. You could cause someone to have a bad day by giving them bad energy, and they could go give a bad day to everyone else that they meet and then just pass on. If you took responsibility for everything that happened over there, you might take responsibility for something tragic, but it should make you think about and be more deliberate with your actions to say, yo, let me do something different. Let me be better because I don't want anything negative to arise from how I'm behaving. So that's just something in my mind, the way I think. I hope it resonates with y'all. But enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Be great, be safe, and keep building. Peace out.